Good morning, everyone, and it is May 3rd, 2019. Can't believe it's already May. Welcome. We've slowed down on the number of videos that I do for those of you who may expect it every single day. And the reason why is I want to put some more work behind and give a lot more background in Ephesians. And so we've slowed it down. Not that I'm working any less, actually, I'm working probably a little more, but to try to get you things that you might not hear even in Sunday school. And so the design here is to grow you and to develop you as well. So today we're going to be answering some questions that have been posed to me. The first question today was, are you a theonomist? And so a lot of people may not even know what a theonomist is. So I wanted to make sure that I address that issue. John Frame defined it, and I'm reading it right here, as theonomy as a school of thought within Reformed theology which prefers literal, specific, and detailed applications of Mosaic civil laws to modern civil government. The word prefer here gives us some leeway. At points, the theonomists, like the rest of us, apply the law only in general and non-literal ways. And so we do have an open and broad way of doing it. But they tend to more than the rest of us to prefer specific and literal ways of applying God's law. And so theonomist, you would see Greg Bonson was a theonomist. There's a lot of groups out there who are theonomistic. I am not. Just to get this, my critique has always been influenced by a dissertation that was written about 15 years ago, where they traced God's civil law and how it was applied in the New Testament. I thought that's a fairly good thing, because theonomists will want to apply as much as possible the civil law into the modern civil code. I think in many ways that was designed for God's covenant people at God's covenant time, and as they have a covenant group of that God designed as a nation at that time. So I think you see an ethnical and a theological component in that. And so how did the Bible apply those laws in the New Testament? And almost surely they were always applied, never to the civil government, but always to the church, which actually makes kind of sense. If the Old Testament church was Israel, the gathering of God's people, then you would expect that to be applied in the church. Now, but the church does not have the authority and the power of the sword, meaning they don't have the authority and the power to enact certain punishments, because that is reserved for the state, and therefore there is the punishment of the sword that's not quite there. So there are some things in the civil law that we would definitely want to condemn, even if the civil law today doesn't condemn it. And as such, there's a place for church discipline, and there's a place for the church to enact those measures. But I don't think those places are always on the state. Are there reserved areas in the state? Yes, I think there is. Is God's moral law still applicable? Yes, there is. Is God's ceremonial law fulfilled in Christ? Yes, it is. But so how do you take the judicial law? How do you take that which the state is supposed to be done? And I think, as Frame tremendously points out there, is that we're all going to take a view of how the Old Testament views it, but I think the more literal translation of making it a one-on-one scenario is from the theonomist that says, well, if you were to cut off a hand, you're to cut off a hand. I mean, if you are to do this, it should be done today, and it would eliminate a lot of problems, they would think. If my brother was married, he's not, and he died, and I was not married, I would marry his wife, and those kinds of things that they would want to expect. Now, even theonomists disagree with a lot of these things too. So there's not a unanimous consent there. There's a variety between the radical elements within there, or the different elements in there that are radical. Some of them I respect, but there's even various views on theonomy within that group. So, but to answer the question, I am not a theonomist. The next one is kind of appropriate for today. The next question I get is, do you believe in replacement theology? The short answer is no. But I'm going to explain my answer because there's a lot of confusion on what replacement theology is and what me, as a Christian, as a person who believes in covenant theology, believes. Uh, Oftentimes, I get people who use replacement theology because they misunderstand what it is and what covenant theology is as well, and they impose their dispensational beliefs on a covenantal framework to make us sound like we're covenantal theology. Now, this is not to say that some theologians who are covenant theology hasn't used the word replacement, but they don't use it in the same way, I think, as replacement theology does. Now, why is this important today is because some reports have seen that a recent shooting was the guy who espoused some of the views using replacement language. Let me understand, replacement theology has always been on the out extremes, in many ways considered heretical. And so I'm not here to talk about that particular instance because I'm not an expert on what happened there in his theology, but I am wanting to talk about replacement theology. So let's talk about that for a second. Replacement theology, let me go back. I actually hit the wrong one. Bear with me. And I hit the advance the screen when I should have hit not the advance the screen. So replacement theology differs from dispensationalism, which dispensational theology is usually the one who threatens me with the dispensation. I don't know why I'm keeping going backwards and forwards. Maybe that's a problem with how I set that up. So I am going back here. So replacement theology believes ethnical Israel is replaced by ethnical Gentiles. So there was a group of people, and we're going to go back to this actually, and maybe I can just edit this real quick here. Time between there. I did not replace the time between there. So guys, I am going to have to fade, transmit, slide is manual, use hotkeys. I'm going to go ahead and replace that, talking about replacement theology. And go back to it here in just a second. Let's get to the other slide. I love it when I didn't do technology right and I thought everything was perfect and it wasn't. And so got that. Okay, I'm going to play that. Let's go here, and my hotkeys aren't working either. So we will just work with what covenant theology believes, and then I'll try to get to what replacement theology was as well. So covenant theology, it believes that Jewish people were saved by grace alone in Christ alone in the Old Testament. They weren't selected. They were not a covenant people because they were ethnically Jewish. They were covenant people because God saved them by grace alone, in Christ alone. They looked forward to their salvation. Now, replacement theology will believe that the Jewish people were selected mainly because they were ethnically Jewish. Now, I think there's a line that they come from Abraham, but the true selection, the true covenant of God's people were not ethnic Jews. They were people who believed. We see this because of Ruth. We see this because of various people in the Old Testament who were Gentiles, who were brought into the Jewish community because they believed God and it was accounted to them as righteousness. In fact, in Romans it says not all Israel is Israel. In other words, not everyone who was a part of Israel in the Old Testament was true Israel because they were a part of a bigger covenant community, but they were blessed because they were with other people in the covenant, not because they were a part of that covenant community. And so Jewish people were saved by grace alone, by grace alone. I shouldn't have had a comma there. By grace alone, in Christ alone. Covenant theology believes Jesus is the true Israel, not ethnic Gentiles nor Jews. So the dispensationalists believe in one thing, is they believe that Israel are Israel by ethnicity, and that Gentiles are Gentiles by ethnicity. But we believe covenant theology rejects replacement theology, which focuses on on the ethnical areas, that ethnic Jews were replaced by ethnic Gentiles. Dispensationalists say that ethnic Jews were given that because they were ethnically Jewish. They were born of Abraham, and that's the reason why they were in covenant. Covenant theology is going to say, no, Jesus was the true Israel all along. And what he has done to the Gentiles, going to use biblical language here, is grafted them in with the Jews. Therefore, there is reconciliation. If you look at the green on the bottom of the page, in Christ, both Jew and Gentiles are reconciled together. We believe together in Christ. Now, Jews have to believe in the Christ who died on the cross for their sins. But in Christ, there is a true Israel that is united together. And Israel was not the Jewish people. It was Christ. He's the true vine. We are grafted in. We are the branches. He was the one who is truly, I got a hair somewhere on me, I'm sorry. He is the one who truly grafted us in together as a one people. We are not looking for a national Israel. We are looking for Jesus Christ, the true Israel, the true vine. I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me, I in him, he shall bear much fruit. The vine was a representation of Israel. Christ is our Israel. And so we're not looking at ethnicity here. We're looking to Christ. In the Old Testament, who was the true Israel? It was Christ. In the New Testament, who's the true Israel? It is Christ. It points to Jesus Christ that way. Covenant theology also believes Abraham's descendants are by faith alone, through grace alone, not by a birth line. And we say that in Romans, that we are his offspring by faith, not because we were born into it. And so dispensationalists will believe that Israel is Israel because they were born into it. Of course, we already saw that Jesus is the true Israel. Replacement theology believes that the Gentiles have replaced Israel, the ethnic Israel. So ethnic Gentiles have replaced them, and that they're no longer a part of, because they have rejected them as an ethnic group. But Jesus Christ alone here, but they believe they were replaced. But we don't. We believe that Abraham's descendants, all of them, are those who believed. And believing, they were counted as righteousness. It is not based upon birth line. It is based upon the work of Jesus Christ. Next, covenant theology says God's promises are to believers, both Jew and Gentile, not because you are Jew and Gentile. I cannot be saved, and I am not in covenant with God because I happen to be born a Gentile or a Jew. I'm not rejected by God because I happen to be born a Gentile or a Jew. I am brought in together with other believers from all eternity because I believe, and it was counted to me as righteousness, just as Abraham believed. Abraham was not saved, was not a Christian, did not have covenant with God because he happened to be Abraham. He was because he believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. As such, even in Israel times, while there were people a part of Israel who didn't believe, the blessings were on the group of people because that was God's chosen people that he saved by grace and through faith. Not because they were ethnically Jewish, but they believed God, and it was counted to them as righteousness. So we believe that both Jews and Gentiles are reconciled to each other. They are reconciled to each other by Christ, in Christ alone. And so both Jews and Gentiles, there's no disagreement there. God brings us together. In Christ, we are one. I hope that makes sense. I wish I had the other slide. I kind of felt like I was off a little bit there. But let me know what you think. I know a lot of dispensationalists will not agree with that. And that's okay. I don't agree with them. I agree that we are saved, all saved, through Christ alone. And I think Hebrews makes that clear. I think Romans makes that clear. I think every place makes that clear, whether you're in the Old Testament or the New Testament. It's in Christ alone. So everyone, thank you very much. I hope you have a great day. My sister said good morning. She is upstairs probably right now or in my kitchen. So I will see you in just a second, Kelly. All right. You take care. Have a good day, guys, and may the Lord bless you and keep you, and may His face shine upon you and give you peace. Amen.